folks, welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to be making a Damascus Katana. Not just any katana, but this one is going to be layered with pure silver. That's right folks, we're going to be making some Damascus with pure silver in it for the Samurai Challenge. Let's go. I'll be doing a layered construction for this blade. The outer cladding will be the Damascus, then the silver, and then the core will be 80 CRV2 high carbon steel. When the bevels are ground on an angle, that's going to expose our pattern. After welding up this 35 layer billet, it goes into some kerosene to help with the forge weld and into a really hot forge, probably close to 2200 degrees Fahrenheit. We want to take it easy for the first couple of heats just to set the weld. Now that I've set the forge weld, we can be a little more aggressive, even pressing it on the sides. This whole process is being done on my homemade hydraulic press. It's a 30-ton hydraulic press, has a lot of power. If you had to do this by hand, this would take a really long time with such a huge billet. My goal is to stretch this out and chop it up into 6 pieces for the restack. That will give me 210 layers. This last heat with the drawing dies should give me the length I need, and then I'm going to flatten it out to have a nice flat billet for the restack. Off camera I cut this up, ground all the mating edges and welded it up. We're going to go back in the forge. Also, what you're seeing here is my homemade ribbon burner forge. If you're curious on how to build this, there's a link up in the corner. And just like before, we're going to use a couple of heats just to set the welds. Then we'll get aggressive with it. I've had many people in comments say that a hot billet looks like something they'd like to take a bite out of. I'm not sure that'd be so safe. The reason I use these rounded drawing dies is to draw the steel perpendicular to the curve on the die. If you just use flat dies, you're just going to stretch the steel in all directions, and that's not what we want. Remember, I'm going to be using this Damascus as cladding for the sword, so I need 2 pieces of identical length. So once I get this long enough, I'm going to cut it in half and forge those separately. It's also easier that way. Off camera, I've already cut this, so this is half of that billet. One thing the hydraulic press is not good at is thin stock. It just sucks the heat out too much. So we're going to be switching to the rolling mill. The rolling mill only contacts the steel a little bit, so you get a lot of work done with each heat. You'll see here how quickly I stretch it out. Okay, so here we are after the second forging session. I've got the 210 layers of Damascus now. So this is our cladding. These things are about 3/8 thick, but that's okay because you'll see what I'm going to do with them. Now it's time to cut up the pure silver we're going to layer into this billet. This stuff is really malleable and you can see how easily it forms. Alright, so we got all our bars surface ground. It's time to stack them up. It's good practice to weld up all the seams just for insurance, but you really don't want to get the non-ferrous metal melted at any point. Pure silver has a melting point of 1763 degrees Fahrenheit, so we're not technically forge welding this. We're really kind of brazing it all together, so we don't want to get this billet too hot. Since the billet is over 18 inches long and my forge is only 18 inches, I had to heat this up into sections. That made this take forever. Well, here it is after the first forging of the actual sword. Still pretty thick. It's 24 inches long. It's obviously not the full length. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a ladder pattern by doing radial kind of stripes. So I'll show you guys how I'm going to do this. You'll see what I'm going to do. Alright, there's our radial ladder pattern. We're going to forge that out, flatten it out, and get the length we need. The theory here is because I've removed some of the material, when I press it down, it should bring the other material to the surface and create a pattern. It doesn't quite work out exactly how I'd envisioned, but it still looks pretty cool in the end. Now it's back to the rolling mill to get the thickness and the length that I need. Now I'm just making sure I get the right curve or sori in the blade. So I created a template on my tabletop. So there's the katana forged. Rolled out nice and flat with the rolling mill. The only issue was I had some silver melt out in several places because my thermocouple actually went. Right when I started this, the thermocouple in my forge went. So it got overheated. So this may be ruined. I'm going to have to grind off the edges and see. So that's what we're going to do right now. And folks, before you run out of the comments and tell me that the curve in a katana isn't forged in, I'm fully aware that the curve comes from a differential heat treat. But because this has Damascus cladding, I don't want to hamon over top of that. It will just conflict with the aesthetics. And for those of you that want to complain that it wasn't forged to shape, you can't forge these layered constructions with non-ferrous metals on the edge. they just delaminate. So instead, we cut them out. So here's the profile all ground out. Pretty happy with it. I like the curve. So now the only issue I have is I didn't get it exactly as straight as I wanted while forging. So I'm going to put it in the new heat treating oven and normalize it and actually straighten it out at the same time. This is a 47-inch vertical heat treating oven from Even Heat. It made the whole heat treating process much simpler. So during the normalization cycle, I just threw this in the press quickly and it is dead straight now, which makes me happy. Now I'm going to surface grind the edges, and then we'll start our bevels. Okay, after a couple hours of grinding, we've got the blade all nice and tapered. It takes a while to get the taper right on this and maintain the core. It's about 154 thousandths or 0.154 at the tip and about just under a quarter inch, so 0.24 right here, which is great. That's exactly what we want. I still got a lot of grinding to do, so that'll come down after final grinding anyway. Let's see how much it weighs. Okay, so just almost 41 ounces, so just a little bit over 2 pounds, which is great. Final, I'm shooting for about 2.5 pounds with the handle attached, and I still have a lot of grinding to do. It'll probably lose half of its weight in the blade, alone. So I think we're all set. We can start to do bevels. Grinding this sword took several hours. It's kind of unwieldy to have to pass it back and forth across the platen, but I got it done. Here's a look at the bevel grinds. Of course, this is pre-heat treat, so these will be refined later, and that silver streak will move up the blade. Now it's time to do the quench. I've already normalized and thermocycled this. Now it's going in a Parks 50 to get nice and hard. Well, the heat treat went pretty well. Here it is after the first temper cycle. It did have a slight warp in it, still does, and we're going to fix that now. So we're going to clamp a piece of steel onto it with just a little pin, and we'll take a little bit of that bend out. Don't forget, folks, this build is for the Samurai Challenge. That's a competition between these YouTube channels. We'd like you to watch all the builds and vote for which one you think is the best. You can't vote for me because I'm one of the judges, along with our guest judge. We also invited viewers to participate and build along with us, and the sponsors are providing prizes to the viewers. There's links in the video description on how to vote and also for all of our sponsors, so go take a look. After another temper cycle, the sword came out perfectly straight. Now it's time to surface grind the sides. Now I'm using some layout fluid so I can put a very subtle bevel on the top spine. It's going to look something like this. Then we're going to grind the main bevels. It's not that obvious in the video, but my tool rest is actually on an angle, so I can easily do the bevels on the spine. And now it's time to do the final bevels. This took quite a long time, a couple hours. I wanted to make sure these were nice and precise, and the core was nice and centered. There it is after final grinding. It pretty much disappears at the edge. So really happy with it. Before we do any hand sanding, we're going to start on the fittings. So I'm going to make the habaki. So for the habaki on this sword, I'm going to be using silver, again, just to match the motif. This time it's going to be sterling silver, so this is 92.5% silver. So this is 3x6. It's an 1/8 of an inch. This was very expensive, close to $1,000 for this. So I'm going to be cutting it down the center and then wrapping it around here, and I'll probably have some extra, which I'll use for the manuki. All right, let's get it done. The silver looks a little dull and gray here. That's because I've already annealed it to make it easier to work. Now it's time to silver solder the gap in the front of the habaki. This made me really nervous because silver solder only has a melting point around 100 degrees lower than sterling silver, which is what this is. So I didn't want to melt my habaki apart. Because of all the silver in this blade, I decided to call this the Silver Moon Katana. Here's my design for the guard. It's got 2 crescent moons on it, and then these little holes will be drilled right through. These are going to have pure silver in them. And then, of course, the center portion. And then there's going to be a silver inlay right around the edge, and then this whole area will be dug down. We're going to go do this on the rotary table on the mill. This was my first big project using the rotary table, and although it took a little learning, it worked really well. So here's the habaki, rough sanded. You see it fits well. It's a little snug at the end, but I still need to sand this, so that'll tighten it up. You saw me do the guard on the mill. It was quite a complex operation, but I think it looks really good. These holes will get filled with silver, so stay tuned for that. Next is the seppas, which is the spacer that goes on top. And of course this will be black, and it'll have a silver seppa, and the habaki will sit on top of that. And the seppas go on both sides. So for that, we're going to use this piece of cutoff that we cut off when we did the habaki. I'm just going to stretch it out in the rolling mill, and yeah, then we'll cut our seppas out of that. There's the silver for our seppa. I've already actually cut one out, so I'm going to just use that as a template. I was careful to save all the cutoffs and even the grinding dust, because later on I'm going to cast this stuff and save it for a future project. Now I'm using some needle files just to put some scallops around the edge of the seppa. So here's the habaki, seppa, and the suba all fit up here. I'm just holding them on. So here's what we're going to be using for the handle. This is a piece of basswood. So I'm going to make this kind of a square. So I'll cut this, and then I'll cut that in two. Put the sword inside, trace the tang, and then kind of chisel out the inside of where the tang goes. And then glue it back together. So there's the handle. We put it on here, and it goes on just great. So now it's time to work on the fuchi, which is the metal piece that goes at the opening. And one of the keys to these handles is that you need to undersize it at this stage, because it's going to get stingray wrap and then the leather Edo wrap, which is going to add some thickness to it. So it should feel a little narrow at this point. For the fuchi, I decided to use mild steel because I want to hot salt it along with the guard so they both come out jet black. I'm taking all my silver scraps, I'm going to put them in a crucible, and I'm going to melt them in the foundry. This will give me one piece of silver. I also need some silver that's an 1/8 inch round, so I'm going to pour that at the same time. I'm using an 1/8 inch drill bit in this casting sand to make a mold to cast what I need for the guard. So here's the silver from the casting. We'll cut this off, spin it in the drill just so it's nice and shiny, and then cut it up into 4 and hammer it into the guard. Now I'm starting the silver inlay around the edge of the guard. First, I use my pneumatic engraver to make a channel all the way around. Then I go back and dovetail the bottom so the silver has something to stick to, and then I push in the silver, hammer it in, and then sand it clean. After checking the weight and balance of the blade, I realized it was still a little bit off, so I decided to go back and put a fuller, which is a groove, down both sides of the blade. So that's what I'm doing here on the mill. Instead of my maker's mark, I'm writing Tyrell Knifeworks in katakana down the tang. Time to make the manuki. Those are the little ornaments that go on either side of the handle underneath the Edo wrap. For these, I'll be doing little crescent moons. The third one here is to go on the side of the saya. So it's time to put the wrap on the handle, and for that we're going to be using the traditional stingray skin. So this is a white stingray skin. They're quite a bit more expensive than the black ones you typically see. We're going to be cutting a piece, wrapping it all the way around the handle up to the black lines. After cutting it to the right size, I just apply some contact cement and then wrap it in cord just to keep it all nice and tight while it glues. It's time to drill the hole for the peg. I put everything together with a spacer that's about half the thickness of the seppa so that it's nice and tight when I drive the peg in. This is one of my favorite parts. This is hot salting the fittings to turn them jet black. This is going to make that silver inlay really pop. Alright, it is time for the etching. I've got this sanded all the way up to 800 grit, which took a very, very long time. Now we're going to go into ferric chloride acid and we're going to bubble it just to make sure we get a nice, even etching. The last step is doing the leather Edo wrap around the handle. This takes quite a while and it takes a lot of practice. I'm still getting good at it.